So hi everyone, welcome to this series of panels questioning the sustainability of the concept of adoption. These panels aim to progressively expose the complexity of adoption and to develop critical thinking surrounding various issues that most people outside of the adoption community perhaps don't know about. In the future panels, we will touch on subjects such as adoptive parents' concerns, intercountry adoption, out-of-home care, and even surrogacy, and there will be more space for debate. But today we will be giving the opportunity to local Australian adoptees only to talk about some of the difficulties they had to live through. We will focus on their personal experiences in order to raise important questions. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Catherine Lynch, a closed record adoptee from 1972. Welcome.
Thanks, Pascal.
Yep. I have Penny Mackison, a closed record adoptee from the pre-1980s era.
Thanks, Pascal. Hello, everyone.
I have Brian Cherry, an adoptee from 1954 who lived through abuse. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Pascal. Thanks for having me. I hope we inform the general community about those issues.
Thank you. And William Hammersley, an adoptee from the 1950s black market of adoption. Hi, William.
Hello, Pascal. How are you? Hello, audience.
So the first question I'd like to raise is the difficulty to find younger adoptees who will speak up critically about their own adoption. Why is that? So Dr. Catherine Lynch, you have a great relationship with your adoptive parents, yet you are heavily critical about this issue.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks, Pascal. It's a very complicated issue, but in many ways, adoptees are gagged in society. On one level, if you speak out on the internet, especially in very pro-adoption sites, you will get deleted and blocked if you want to say anything critical about the institution of adoption. There's also many other reasons that adoptees can't speak out. The adoptive family could be very hurt and offended, and it could potentially destroy your relationships. So many adoptees keep very, very quiet for that reason. There's also there's two general categories of adoptees. One of the adoptees that are told very late in life, they're called LDAs, or late discovery adoptees, and others like myself are told once, but then it becomes something not spoken about because it's too emotional and it's too hurtful, and so you grow up never talking to anyone about it, and it's incredibly isolating and lonely. And especially in the closed adoption era, you never met any other adoptees unless you had an adopted sibling. So a lot of adoptees, in a way, I'm using the word brainwash, but that's very heavy, but because you're brought up from infancy to look at adoption in a certain way, like, oh, this is good, this is great, it can take a very, very long time to think out of the box, to look at it critically. And once you start looking at it critically, unfortunately, the whole thing does collapse in a pretty bad way, as far as recognising that you've been deprived of a lot of basic rights, just about knowing who you are, your identity, knowing your story, your genealogy, your history, having a falsified birth certificate. You know, I found out my name was Mary Ann, and I had a completely different nationality than I thought I did. So you have a really full-on identity crisis. You discover you discover who you really are, rather than the construct you've been supplied. Now, another reason adoptees don't come out is because of separation trauma from birth, which means that you've got some very, very profound and embedded griefs that you've built up over the top of that you may not want to face. So a lot of adoptees say, oh, I'm adopted, but I put it in the too hard basket and I don't want to talk about it. So they sort of conform to what society wants for them, which is don't search for your relatives, don't question. We call adoptees like that as still in the fog. We call it a bit like gay rights talk about being in the closet. We've got adoptees being in the fog. So we invite adoptees to come out of the fog. Don't be scared. Don't be frightened. Even me talking online now, I could have family members stumble across this video, and this has the potentiality of hurting people's feelings. But even though I have wonderful adoptive family, adoptees have to recognise that adoption's a lottery, and you essentially become the private property of a family of strangers. And for some adoptees, that can be a really, really horrific experience. They can suffer abuse. You can't vet people to take in infants that are not related to them. You can't vet them as being great parents or anything. Nobody knows what they're going to turn out like, and so it's really, really is this random experience. So I don't want to turn around and say, oh, I'm not going to criticise adoption because I've got these, I've been looked after well, because I don't want to betray, I guess, my fellow adoptees. I want to stand up for all adoptees and say adoption, stranger infant adoption is a really fraught institution that really deprives us of our rights, and it's time that we get our rights back. So one of those rights, for instance, is inheritance. We're all disinherited at the point of adoption. There's no point in doing that, is there? I mean, we get people are adopted from overseas. Why is there a need to disinherit them, to punish them in that way? Why can't they inherit the photos and memorabilia of their genetic family? Things like that are also access to information. Everybody knows the story of having your adoptive parents on your birth certificate. So it's not a record of who you are, it's a record of your adoption. Even so, that's quite a difficult issue. I think, let's just see, how many more minutes do I have, Pascal?
It's done. You have your 5 minutes. And,
all right, I'll just close up with the point that I think the real reason adoptees don't go out and criticise the institution of adoption that much is a lack of education. So it took me 7 years doing a PhD on adoption to find out how it evolved. It's a very recent institution. It's not an ancient institution as many pro-adoption lobbyists say it is. Stranger infant adoption is a modern phenomenon. The idea of giving your baby to people you never met is really unheard of before the 20th century, except in the story of Moses. Really it's just a lack of education. Adoptees have to get out there, find out what adoption is, why they are adopted, and overturn, start overturning the laws that are keeping us powerless today.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So Penny, yourself, you did have a good relationship with your adoptive parents, and only until they passed away that you started being active in the adoption community.
Yes, I was born in '63. It was the year of close adoption, but I always knew I was adopted from a very early age, and so did my adopted brother. He's slightly older. We also have 5 adopted cousins. The story, so while our adoptive parents were very open, the story was kept very simple about what my circumstances were, my mother's circumstances. I think I was extremely lucky in the lottery of adoption to have such good adoptive parents. They were very good people. We were very well loved, very well cared for, always had very close relationships. And I was often asked or told how lucky I was, although even from the earliest stage I felt uncomfortable with that, knowing what I had lost to have that gain. And of course there was only one response you could make when you were told how lucky you were, which was to agree, otherwise you would have seemed ungrateful or disloyal. Because I always knew I was adopted, I think as a child and young person I was curious but didn't want to find out more information or search for birth family, but nor did I discount that I might want to at some point into the future. And I have to say it was a bit of a double-edged sword having such good relationships with my adoptive family, because they treated me and my brother as if we were born to them, but the flip side was that they expected us to act and behave as if we were born to them. So My adoptive parents were very into genealogy, and their families were very important to them. And there was a lot of pressure throughout my childhood and adulthood subsequent to that to embrace those histories as if they were my own, and i.e. Not stated but very, very strongly felt was not to go further, not to search for my family. I moved to Melbourne I was born in Melbourne, but I was placed with my adoptive family at 3 weeks, came back to Melbourne in 1980 to do social work, where I learned about adoption. Through the 80s, I did a bachelor and master's, and always have worked in children and family services, including child protection. I actively avoided working in adoption for many years because I was worried about conflict of interest and how people would perceive me. I continued to remain close to my adoptive parents, but I did have cause to search for more information in 1990 when I was married and contemplating having children, and I got such a shock when I got that information that I didn't know what to do with it. I hid it away, I repressed it. The story was so different to what I'd been told. So that was pretty tricky to deal with. I couldn't speak with my mother, my adoptive mother, mum, as I called her, my adoptive mother. My adoptive father had already died. But I had cause to get that information out and search for my family in 1997 when my second pregnancy of twins was a premature labour and the babies died, and all that repressed grief from earlier separation, etc., all came to the fore. I fell in a big heap and needed to work out who I was, discover my identity. So I did find my mother and some siblings, and that went quite positively, but my adoptive mother did not handle that at all well. And to this day, that's a really, deeply hurtful thing for me, that even though mum had, my adoptive mother had been so open all my life, she did not want to embrace my family when I found them. And so, yeah, I was living like, if it was a double-edged sword growing up as an adoptee, it was like living a double life. I think I've heard Catherine use that term, or even a shadow life, because I had to keep discussions about my mother and her, my half-siblings secret. I couldn't discuss them with my adoptive mother or my extended adoptive family in case they mentioned it, and then that would upset my adoptive mother. It was after my depression experience and my reunification with my family that I decided I could work in adoption, and in 2002, I joined the Intercountry Adoption Service, and I was involved with Victoria's Intercountry Adoption Service for almost 12 years. And it was only towards the end of it that I started to realise I couldn't work in it anymore, and only now do I feel I'm in a position to speak publicly about the complexities of adoption.
Thank you very much, Penny, for sharing that. So, William, you did not have unlike the two others, you did not have a good relationship with your adoptive parents at all. You actually lived through physical abuse, and also hated your mother for putting you up into adoption. What happened to you exactly, and what are the circumstances of your adoption?
Yeah, that's quite true, Pascal. For at least 60 years of my life, I hated my mother, and I could never ever understand why I was living with these people who were very short, and I was quite tall. I couldn't get along at all with my brother, my adopted brother, and my adopted sister. She was all right, but we were very different than each other. I grew up completely angry. I was a very, very angry person. I went through self-destruction and suffered a heck of a lot through my childhood. I then heard about the Victorian apology many years later when I was around 40 years old, or 50, 60 years old, sorry. I heard about the Victorian apology, and the Victorian apology was the apology the state government made to victims of forced adoption. And that was only a couple of years ago on the 25th of October in 2012. I went to that apology, and that's where I met Brian Cherry, actually, on the steps of Parliament House that day, and he helped me come into the apology. When I walked up to those steps, I just started to cry. I couldn't stop it. I just cried and cried and cried. I saw the steps covered in children's shoes, and they, for some reason, they just took my emotions, and I let out all the pain I must have suffered for all those years. Then, after that, I met up with a woman called Elizabeth Edwards from Origins. Origins is a mothers group that work towards the apology occurring, along with a lot of other adoptees and mothers groups. I went and compared my papers with her and showed her the situation of my birth, and she said, "You sound like a 50-pound baby." And she showed me this speech that was done by a chap called John Crimean. He was the member for Hoddle in the Commonwealth Parliament. Back in 1950, he did a speech talking about 50-pound babies, children who were babies that were being sold on the black market by unscrupulous doctors. She thought that I might have been one of them. Well, that got me going. Then I spent the next 2 years after that going through the archives, the Victorian archives, and looking and searching for papers. I found many different letters leading me on my path, and then one day, it was about a year and a half later, I found this incredible file that ran that was about the adoption file from the 1916 through to 1964 that had everything. From the development of adoption in Victoria right through to judges' opinions, lawyers' opinions, the changes of the bills, and I also found confidential letters that went around on the subject, and newspaper reports on the subject of babies being sold in the States, in Australian states. When I went through that file and I found one particular letter that came from John Crimean to the Chief Secretary of Victoria, and it was a confidential letter asking him to carry out a particular search on a particular doctor. That doctor's name was Ray Cranshaw Hart. He lived in Albert Park at the time in a very large mansion. He turned out to be procuring young desperate women to come to him, and he would send them off either for an abortion or for an adoption. An illegal abortion, I need to add. It was back in the days when abortions were done in backyards. He was collecting money under the table, that means cash money, from the abortions. For every abortion he referred a woman to. And I say woman, my mother was 27 years of age. She wasn't a young woman or a teenager who fell pregnant. She was a 27-year-old woman who was married and was going through the process of divorce. She had 2 children. She had no choices. If she'd lost her divorce proceedings, because in those days divorce was based on fault, not no fault, and the fault was either the woman was an adulteress, the husband had deserted, or she had deserted the husband, or there was violence within the family. Now, my mother had 2 children. Her choice was minimum. She would have lost her 2 children if she had kept me, and she would have had to face a lifetime or a period of time in her life of suppression for being an adulteress. She wouldn't be, in those days, she wouldn't have been able to get employment or anything like that. So it was a very difficult situation she was in, and a very difficult decision she had to make. A decision that I think I would have made the same when I consider it, the circumstances. Anyway, back to our Dr. Hart. Our Dr. Hart was making heaps of money. desperate, childless couples, because it was after the war. Desperate childless couples were looking to form families. My particular adopting couple, they had one child already through adoption, a male, and then they were looking to put together a 3-child family. They put in an application for the second child, but of course that would have taken 2 years back then to get the second child, up to 2 years, even longer. They wanted a girl, of course, a boy, a girl, but they found that it was going to take so long, and they heard on the grapevine, and the grapevine used to come through coal stores back in those days. They heard on the grapevine that they could adopt a child if they contacted Dr. Hart. So they did that. They became what they were as queue jumpers. They jumped the queue. He would then organise the adoption and collect the money of £50 off them. Then later on, there was an inquiry in Victoria for adoptions. And that inquiry was pushed through. For abortions, and that inquiry was pushed through by Bertram Wainer. If anybody out there knows or remembers Bertram Wainer, Bertram Wainer was a political activist, a doctor, who supported the process of developing of legalising abortions. In his process of doing that, sorry, I've forgotten my track of thought.
So,
he found that police were receiving bribes, and just to wind it up, he found that police were receiving bribes from these doctors. There was 4 main hospitals in Victoria doing this. 1 was in the city and 3 were in the suburbs. All of the doctors that were involved in each one of those hospitals were paying police bribes, and they are the same doctors that Bertram Wainer took to the Kay inquiry to charge for paying bribes for abortions.
okay.
I wind it up there. I don't know what else to say.
No, that's great. Thanks, William. That means that that was a common phenomenon in the 1950s, where policemen were bribed by the doctors to conduct abortions and adoptions under the table. That's very enlightening. Thank you, William, for that.
Thank you.
Brian?
Hi, how are you, Pascal?
Yeah, I'm really good. So you as well did not have a great relationship with your adoptive parents at all.
No, I had a terrible time.
Yep.
I was adopted in 1954 into a family that they adopted several children, so I have stepbrothers and stepsisters. All I can remember is physical abuse, serious physical abuse, and on my father's side, and on my mother's side, serious verbal abuse and being put down. I was adopted when I was 2. I was brought to Victoria. The family moved from Western Australia to Victoria when I was about 6 or 7. When I got to the age of 10, I was taken to the children's court. I still remember the day I was taken there. I was taken to the children's court by the Yarra River in Melbourne and classified as uncontrollable. And I was made a state ward, and I was put in a children's home, and where I was sexually abused within the first year of being in the home, repeated abuse. When I turned, I'm 62 now, when I turned 51, I got a letter from a social worker in Western Australia telling me that my sisters would like to get in touch with me, my half-sisters on my mother's side, 2 sisters and a brother. I made contact, and apparently I'd been on the adoption triangle registered with them for 14 years. But what happened, they wouldn't put me in touch with my sisters and my half-sisters and brother until after my mother had passed. And anyway, I went over to Western Australia and I met them, and I got a photo of my mother, which I never had. I've never had any photo. And I also got given to me a photo that my mother had kept of me when I was 2 years old, playing in a little oval tub with two other little kids. And it had been 40 degrees that day, and a reporter had gone to the Alexander Children's Home and taken a photo of three little boys playing in a tub. So I got that photo my mother, my birth mother, kept all her life. Learning the history of my mother, she got pregnant. My birth father didn't support her at all, so she was basically a single mother, and no one would help her. And this is the problem we have these days. If kids are adopted these days, sure, the right of the child is the first thing that should come up. And if the mother's struggling, give her a hand. If it's financial help or health problems, mental health problems, whatever, help her. The rights of the child should always come first, even before the rights of the adoptive parents. Now, and then a couple of years later on, another 5 years passed. So I was approximately 58 years old. I got a letter from another social worker, and it was about meeting my brother on my father's side. So I went over to Western Australia and I met up with him. Now he gave me a photo of my father, which I'd never had, and I was also told that well, they put me in touch with him again after my father died. Father passed. So while they were alive, all these decades, they wouldn't put me in touch with my birth parents, even though I'd been registered for over a decade looking for them. Now, my adoptive parents, they were terrible. My father, I've looked in the history of him, because with the advent of Trove being available on the internet, I kept Googling his name and more information came up about him. He actually at the age of 19 went with a pistol and pistol whipped people to try and rob a shop. And then later on he was allowed to adopt me. On my mother's side, when she just put me down all my life and made me feel like I was a piece of crap. And all my life, that's all I can remember of her. When I was basically kicked out of the home when I turned 15. I went back home with my foster parents to live for a year. I hated it. I asked them to put me in a hostel, which they did. I was visiting both my foster mother and my foster father. They were going through a divorce. The only way my mother was after a divorce, the only way she could get a divorce was to prove adultery or wait 7 years. So she actually subpoenaed me to court when I was about 16, 17. She actually subpoenaed me to court to give evidence against my adoptive father that he was living with another woman, because I used to go and stay at their place sometimes on weekends. So I just feel all the way through used and abused. As far as adoption goes, the main thing is, I feel, the rights of the child come way before anyone else. They need to look at uncles, aunties, grandfathers, all this, structured family members before you hand a baby over to strangers. And I heard the doctor say before, you use the word strangers, and I use the same name because basically that's what they are. They're strangers.
Thank you, Brian, for sharing your story. It seems through your 4 stories that adoption is really a lottery. You can end up in either a good adoptive parents' environment in a perhaps abusive or not as
So
good.
is birth.
So is birth. So is birth. Yeah. So I'd like to talk about, because I realize that adoptees have a lot of common, good or bad adoptions, and everything in between. It seems that the psychological repercussions of being an adoptee are quite similar throughout those stories. Catherine, Dr. Catherine Lynch, how did you live psychologically your adoption?
Oh, thanks, Pascal. You, from the word go, you know there's something really, really, really wrong with your life. You don't know what it is. Something's not right. You don't quite fit in, but you're not sure why. Even people who don't know they're adopted have these same really weird feelings of intense loneliness, intense shame. Now, loneliness and shame aren't things that your adoptive family have given you. They're memories. They're knowledge, infant knowledge of what has happened to you, that you've been separated from your mother, which even if you were stolen from your mother, your experience of that event is abandonment. So all you know is that your entire family and your mother has abandoned you, and you are abandoned. So you're a manufactured orphan, if you like. Not a real orphan. Very few adoptees are real double orphans. Most adoptees have 2 living parents. And growing up, other people pick up on the fact that you don't know anything about yourself. People think you're a bit different, strange, and other children can sense that lack of power, that lack of self-awareness, a lack of self-knowledge. That can lead to things like bullying or getting picked on or being ostracised. Just an intense feeling of being uncomfortable your entire life. And also, usually your adoptive family and also your bio family, when you meet them, they're all in utter denial that you may have suffered in any way. Usually they all want to think the myth, believe in the myth that adoption is a wonderful thing, and that although they may have suffered in losing a baby or what, at least the child's had a good life. Well, that's just a fantasy. It's an utter fantasy. The child has gone through the most horrific separation, despair as a baby. It's probably cried for days and days and days. You're sticking the dummy in, trying to get it to settle. So I actually got my hospital records, and that's exactly what they said. Baby would not settle. So no wonder adoptees can't sleep. No wonder they have difficulty in relationships, going for job interviews. Because you know there's something wrong with you, and so does everybody else. So it takes years. I'd say about 10 years out of my life to find out who I am on the most basic level that everybody else understands from birth. Very difficult.
So true.
Thank you, Catherine.
Okay.
And you feel the same or similar emotions and feelings than Catherine?
Pardon?
I think.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Go ahead.
I definitely can. What Catherine has just said absolutely resonates for me. I remember feeling I felt very aware from a very early age of the need to belong. I was a child who wanted to please my adoptive parents. I realised very quickly that education was very important to them. So doing well academically was something I really worked at. Because I wanted to please them, and I always had the feeling, being the second adopted child, that I was the afterthought. My first adopted sibling was a boy, so it was again that whole, we'll have a boy, then we'll have a girl, they'll construct their family. And I really felt like he was the child they'd longed for, and he was the one who came first. So I had to do something very special to be accepted and not abandoned or rejected again. So absolutely, and the whole identity thing, I mean, Catherine's commented that it's taken her 10 years out of her life. Well, in a way, it didn't start to hit me until the next sort of legal phase in my life, getting married. And suddenly it was important to me, I hadn't thought about it before, not to change my name again, because I'd had one name foisted upon me. And at that stage I didn't know that I had been given a name beforehand. So I didn't want to change my name when I was married. I didn't want to go through another forced legal identity change. So things like that keep happening, at different points in your life. Things that you've repressed or that you've tried to deal with in the best way possible, rear their ugly heads. And like I said before, when my twins died, my whole world disintegrated, and I didn't know who I was or what I was here for. And I had this incredible need to rebuild my identity, and I had to start literally from the ground up. I had to then seek out my family. So absolutely, resonates with me what Catherine has explained about the psychology of growing up adopted, and the expectations people have on you that you're okay, you're lucky, you're fine, and you know yourself that you're not.
Thank you. William, you have you feel like you had the same emotional reality and everyone else?
Oh yeah, no, Catherine really hit home. I became the bully instead of being bullied. I got in before they could get to me. I put out this protection. When I used to hang around the streets when I was a kid, with friends and things in the neighbourhood, I was always the one who started the trouble, or who went to the party and destroyed the pie, or it's something that turned everything backwards into it's all about me for some reason. I never ever knew why. When I got to my adolescence, that's when I really went bad. I went out looking for fights. One night I was found in the gutter, covered in blood, where the bouncer had just beaten the living hell out of me. But I was the one who started it, not the bouncer. I was self-destructive for years, and and it really resonates what Penny just said. Was it took until she got married or wanted to get married. In my case, it took until I partnered up with my partner, and I had we were having our first child, or our only child actually, and his existence and me creating or being part of a family for the first time since because I left my adopting couple at 14. I went to the city and started living a bohemian lifestyle with in Carlton, and that's when I started to yearn to want to know, not only for me but for my son, so that he had a heritage, so he could have a future, with that, and know his true grandmother and grandfather and uncles and aunts and all of that. And well, I did. I found my mother, but unfortunately she had died just before the year before I got there. But I did get to meet her future husband, who was a wonderful chap. He was an Austrian, and I got to meet my half sister and my half brother, and I got to find out a little bit about my personal history and my possible full sister, which is still an unknown factor at this point, who unfortunately came to a very tragic end when she was 13. She was being sexually abused by a neighbour, and he murdered her, and then he hung himself. And she, possibly my mother could have been having a continued relationship with her father, because it's unknown exactly who her father was also. Yeah, I don't know what else to put to that at the moment.
Yes, so you were an angry you were angry whilst you were growing up. Brian, how did you feel about your own adoption, and how do you think adoption has had consequences on your mental health?
I, like William, grew up a very, very angry young man. I used drugs and alcohol to fuel everything. We I had a social drink with William, um, and it's not until my last probably half a dozen years that I've come to terms with and got everything pretty well in perspective. And this is why I think about adoption these days. The first thing they need to know, even if it's an inter world or inter country adoption, why not look after, help the mother? If the mother's struggling, help her financially. If it's wealthy people are going to adopt a baby, well, the best thing they could do is help the mother. That's the priority, is to help the child's the main priority. The next thing is to make sure uh, the parents can be helped. And then the third thing, if you can't go there, is go to other family members, an uncle, an auntie, grandparents. There's way too many children in care these days.
And Brian, today,
Yep.
even today, are you still suffering from the repercussions of being an adoptee? And
I still have monthly sessions. I've just started up again. I have monthly sessions with a forensic psychologist who's helping me with some of the issues. I've been angry for decades, and she's helping me, to investigate and understand some of these things. Yeah. So.
What kind of understanding did you gain through the years?
Well, I understand now that because I had self-guilt for decades. I still hold to a degree self-guilt, but she's helping me to come to understanding and terms with that. I have a clearer understanding. I think I have a very clear understanding about adoptions these days. I see these articles of rich people adopting children, and I don't think they really look at the real issues here. I'd like to see research done on people or children that have been adopted in the past, just to see, maybe pick 100 people at random and do research on that, how it's actually panning out. And the other thing we have is my personal thing is, I know the Victorian government were just about to pass laws, but they just got replaced, but they were just about to pass laws where if adoptive children were left out of wills, they had no right to challenge it. I know of someone that was adopted, and their grandparents, their foster mothers has threatened the grandchildren with, "I will cut you out of the will unless you don't stay away from her," and things like. A friend of mine, she went to at her foster mother's place, and she was presented with a paper to sign to cut her out of the will. This type of thing goes on all the time. These things need to be long-term, need to be investigated.
Thanks, Brian. I think Penny as well had to go through counselling. Did you, Penny? We've lost Penny for the moment.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh, sorry.
Can you hear?
Yeah, now I hear you. You went out of connection.
Can't see you, Penny. Oh, there you
Yep, we can now. Just come
Sorry.
up.
Hello.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm having a bit of trouble.
Okay, Penny, so I might go to Catherine in this case. I'm sorry. Catherine, did you want to add
Yes.
anything to that?
Yeah, this isn't about the trauma of separation and adoption. I just wanted to wrap up with a point that what you can get from this panel, the such disparate experiences, is that adoption is the modern invention that's a lottery for the babies involved. And the reason it's here is financial. It's brought in so the state does not have to pay to upkeep children in foster care systems or guardianship systems or do any sort of monitoring. It costs money. If you can get them into a private home, you wipe yourself clean of them. You don't have to pay money, so it's cheap. It's really saves a lot of money for the state. So what that state then has to do to get this accepted, because apparently it was very difficult to get people to accept adopting strange babies in the old days. To get people to accept this, the ethos of family building has been promoted. And just to wrap up, the idea that you construct a family, that you build a family, that it's not a natural biological point of evolution kind of thing, is so widespread today that it's affecting the whole new generation of people. And that's to do with children of IVF procedures using donor sperms and ovums, and also into the surrogacy debate. So this all has repercussions. If you accept infant adoption is this great thing, it's quite easy to take the next step and say, well, we can make babies and take them off their mums for surrogacy purposes. So all this is connected. Because of the acceptance of adoption in our age, people are now accepting the next step. So I just wanted to make that point, that adoption wasn't brought in because it's best for the child. It was brought in to save money for the state.
Thank you, Catherine,
Okay.
for
That's right.
sharing on that. I think Penny's connected.
Sorry, can I just say one more thing? Just with the IVF, the donor sperm, for instance, it's not the same category as surrogacy and adoption, because you do not take the child off the mother. I just wanted to add that so people who have IVF procedures don't suddenly go, what's she saying?
Okay. Thank you, Catherine, very much for your insight. I don't hear you anymore, but so I'm going to conclude this panel at the moment. So thank you for everyone for sharing your experiences being an adoptee in Australia, and how the policies at your time created a reality that you might be upset by, and consequently had repercussions on your psychological development. So thank you very much, Penny. Thanks, William. Thank you, Dr. Kathleen. And thanks,
Thank
Ryan,
you,
for
Pascal.
And I hope
Thank you,
to.
Pascal.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see everyone back on the next panel to discuss more issues about adoption.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pascal. Thanks, everyone.